Okay. Hello, hello, hello. How's it going? Is anybody there? 3 people are here. 3 people are here and 1 person is here. All right. Whoever's here, can you tell me who you are? Anybody? Hello, hello, hello. Is this thing on? Yeah, this thing's on. Okay. Can somebody just say hello or something just to make sure that so I know this thing is actually on and working and somebody's actually hearing this. As you can see, I'm not very tech savvy here. Brian Spanish Smith. Okay, hello Brian. Nice to meet you on YouTube. Okay, the sound is good. Okay, I was actually wondering if if it would make a difference if I wore earbuds, but that probably doesn't make a difference, does it? Well, what should we do? Oh, there's 6 people here now. Okay, 6 people are here. When you come in, just feel free to say hello in the chat. No idea what to expect here. If I should expect a bunch of people who are kind of on the same page as me, or if there will be some people who think I'm horribly wrong and misleading people with my videos, or if there will be a combination of those things. But I welcome both. I'm not sure how long I should wait until I start talking. But the longer I wait, the more bored the people who are already here will become. So I guess I should just start talking about what I want to talk about. Anybody have any thoughts about that? Any input on that? Should I just start talking about what I wanted to talk about? Anybody? All right, I will take that silence. Well, maybe people are typing stuff in the chat and it's just not going through right away or something like that. Is there some setting? There's some setting that affects how fast the chats come in. Moderation, well, whatever. It works for Brian Spanish Smith, so I'll assume it's working for everybody else. Okay. So, yeah, I wanted to talk about healing the evangelical mind and explain what I mean by that. That there's, I think there are some emotional and psychological barriers that evangelicals tend to have, things that make it more difficult for them than it is for other people to embrace the biblical gospel and to embrace certain aspects of the teaching of Jesus, things Jesus and the apostles said that are scary, they're uncomfortable, but evangelicals tend to have an even more difficult time with these things than other people do because of the way they're indoctrinated, the way they are conditioned to think. And And I have compassion on them because of that, because I know what it's like. I was an evangelical for, I was in various evangelical churches for over a decade, 12, 13 years or so. And once you've been indoctrinated with that sort of grace alone, faith alone, imputed righteousness of Christ, eternal security, penal substitution, you don't do anything to be saved. Jesus did it all kind of thinking. When you've been indoctrinated with that, um, it makes the things Jesus and the apostles said that are scary, that are very serious, it makes them even more scary. And it's sort of like and when you have that theology in your head, you are now forced to kind of mangle the scriptures that don't agree with that theology and explain them away, partially in like this self preservation, because of how much those scriptures will terrify you if you understand them to mean what they plainly seem to mean. So you have to kind of explain them away. And anyway, I think that evangelicals are, in a sense, they're kind of at a disadvantage in a way that, there are some unique hurdles, unique barriers for evangelicals that do not exist so much with Catholics or Orthodox, or people who are not kind of Lutheran and Calvinistic in their thinking and in their theology. And it kind of puts them at a disadvantage. And I think that the biblical gospel. Okay, thank you for joining, Annie. I see your comment. By the way, if anybody has any challenges to what I'm saying, or you don't really understand what I'm saying, just put a comment and I will either stop and answer it when it comes in, or answer it in a few minutes when I'm done with my little thing here, my spiel, whatever. And I don't know how long this is going to go on. I don't have a whole lot to say, so I'll just say it, and then we'll see what people say in the comments. And part of the reason why I'm doing this is because this idea of healing the evangelical mind, or trying to untwist the evangelical mind, is something I've been thinking about for a few years now, and trying to figure out how to articulate what's in my mind. And I thought, if I share this with some folks who are kind of on the same page as me, maybe we can all kind of think through it together, not just how to articulate this, how to explain it to people, particularly evangelicals who we want to help. We want to help them get out of this unhelpful way of thinking, but not just how to explain it to them, but also just brainstorming what's the best approach to this? How do we help somebody get out of this way of thinking? This overly comforting gospel that people are hearing, that makes the true gospel of the New Testament sound like such bad news in comparison. So it kind of sets them up for a fail. It puts them at a big disadvantage. Kind of like if somebody maybe if you listen to some of my videos before, you've heard me use this analogy before, where it's like, if you get used to eating something that's really, really tasty, really sugary, like a coffee, you get used to eating, you get used to drinking a coffee with a whole lot of sugar and whipped cream in it, and that's what you have every day. And then somebody gives you a cup of just regular coffee with just a little bit of cream and no sugar, it's going to be disgusting. It's going to be like, oh, you're just going to reject that immediately. Whereas if you had never had that sugary stuff to begin with, the real coffee, the coffee with just a little bit of cream in it might taste pretty good. And and some people just don't like coffee. I see your comment, Super Silver. But you get my point. It's like when someone has gotten used to something really, really sweet, and then you give them something that's tastes good, but it doesn't have all that sugar in it, and it's actually a lot healthier for them, but they reject it immediately because in comparison to what they're used to, it's shocking, it doesn't taste good. And so, that's like what's happening to a lot of people in the evangelical church, where they hear this grace alone, faith alone, eternal security, God will never let you go no matter what you do kind of message. And then then you try to tell them what Jesus said, with all of his warnings and these teachings where he talks about salvation in conditional terms. And it's like, I can't. No, that's false teaching. That's heresy. That's scary. I can't listen to this. And so they're at a tremendous disadvantage. A Catholic doesn't have that problem. An Orthodox Christian doesn't have that problem. They have no problem with the idea that there are conditions. Of course there are conditions. Just read the New Testament. But their problem is that people aren't teaching them to obey what Jesus said. They're being taught to obey Catholic and Orthodox traditions rather than the principles and teachings of Jesus. And they're kind of, they're often very casual, but for different reasons. But I'm just thinking about, how to help the evangelical crowd, because that's where I come from. And sorry if I'm kind of going on and on here, but okay. So let me just present my little 3 or 4 point thing here, and then as I'm no itching ears here. Hello, my friend. You are saying that itching ears is not a good idea. Correct. That is not a good idea. We don't want to itch ears. We want to tell people what they need to know so that they can be ready for the judgment. Jesus is much more concerned that we actually enter the kingdom at the judgment than that we feel like we're going to enter the kingdom at the judgment and then we don't. And so, okay, so there are a few ideas that are deeply lodged. Oh yes, they need to know we're in a covenant. Okay, I know who you are now. Yep. Haven't forgotten about that. Okay, so yeah, there are a few ideas that are deeply lodged in the minds of many evangelical Christians, which make it more difficult for them to embrace biblical teaching, to embrace the biblical gospel than it would have been otherwise. And so there are 3 ideas that I want to just go through real quick here. The first, of course, is this false definition of grace. And this is in no particular order, and there are other ways you could come at this, other ways you could talk about this. But this false definition of grace, which is that grace is this unconditional forgiveness of past, present, and future sins. And in the mind of evangelical Christians, often that's what grace is. Grace equals no conditions. And this creates a problem in their mind that other people don't have in their minds, where they cannot distinguish the difference between earning salvation and meeting a condition for salvation. And they're two very, very different things. But because evangelicals have been indoctrinated to think that grace is unconditional and that therefore salvation is unconditional, anytime you start talking about conditions, they hear earning. They think you're saying, oh, you're saying I got to earn my salvation. And earning something and meeting a condition, those are two very different things, right? So grace. So just to give you an example, what I'm saying, if your boss gives you a check at the end of the week, that is, you have earned that check, right? That is not an act of grace on the part of your boss. That's not an act of kindness, which is what grace means, just means kindness. But you have earned that. You worked for it, and now you're getting your due. You're getting what you are entitled to. You are getting what is owed to you. So there's no grace there, right? However, that's not true of meeting a condition. So if a judge says to a criminal that I'd be willing to overlook the crimes that you have committed if you would be willing to turn away from those crimes and enter into a rehabilitation program. If you'd be willing to do that, I'd be willing to throw out your case and not give you the sentence you deserve, right? That would be grace. That would be an act of kindness on the part of the judge, even though there's a condition attached there, right? And so you can see the difference in those two scenarios very easily, that in one scenario, the boss gives you a check. Hello, Daniel. In one scenario, the boss gives you a check and gives you the wage that is owed to you. And in the other scenario, the judge gives the criminal a condition to receive a gift. These are completely different things, but evangelicals often, because of the way they're taught to think about grace, they can't make that distinction. They can't make the distinction between earning and meeting a condition. And so the New Testament does not teach that we must earn salvation, of course, but neither does it teach that it's unconditional. It teaches a conditional salvation, which is grace. It is kindness. It is something we can never earn or be entitled to. So that's one way in which the evangelical minds are often sort of twisted and warped and can't grasp what the New Testament is saying. The second one that I had in mind to discuss is a false understanding of what happened on the cross. I got your question there, GS. Thoughts about predestination? I'll just leave that for later on. Thank you so much for joining us. Hello, Nick. So a false understanding of what happened on the cross, that Jesus accomplishes salvation totally. We don't contribute anything to it. And we had better not think that we contribute anything to it, because if you think that you contribute something to it, that's very dangerous territory. That's like a slap in Jesus' face, right? And so now people are afraid to think that there's something they have to bring to the table here, which Jesus and the apostles all over the New Testament make that very clear, in this very straightforward language. But people are afraid of that thought, And then the third idea, you bring those two things together, this idea of unconditional grace and this idea that Jesus does something on the cross that we don't add to it. It does all of it for us. There's no real meaningful responsibility on our shoulders. He does the whole thing. And the idea that people have is that God wants them to have total, perfect assurance of salvation, that is his will. He wants us to know for certain not only that we have been saved in the past, but that we will enter the kingdom in the end, no questions asked. And if you have uncertainty about that, if you feel afraid sometimes, I don't know if I'm going to make it kind of thing, then maybe you haven't really trusted in Jesus yet, and which just compounds the fear, because now you're, oh, what if I haven't trusted Jesus? Not only do I have things in my life that aren't godly, but now I'm not sure if I'm trusting Jesus, and it's just fear on top of fear. And and so yeah, no, we're supposed to know for sure that we're going to enter the kingdom. And maybe they might point to 1 John, which says, I'm writing this letter to you so that you may know that you have eternal life. But then they conveniently ignore the rest of the letter where he explains, here's how we know, that we have eternal life, that we keep his commandments, that we love the brothers. So anyway, there's this, it's like they have this idea that Christianity is about certainty. How can I be certain that I'm going to enter the kingdom no matter what I do, guaranteed, kind of thing. And I think that that this kind of comes from Martin Luther, who is the founder of the movement. He sort of set the pattern for how people think, just like Jesus said, you can't do better than your teacher. Who, whenever everyone's all trained up, they're going to be just like their teacher. So whoever our teacher is, we're going to be like them. And people in the evangelical church tend to think like Luther thought. Luther was a guy who was had morbid introspection. He was terrified. He was always examining himself, going way overboard with it. And he craved assurance. He craved certainty. He wanted to know, And when he was studying Romans and Galatians, he had what he thought was a big epiphany from God, and came to a place where he thought he could now have the certainty that he always had wanted before. This is my understanding of basically what happened with him. And so he's the guy who's teaching people in the evangelical church, how to think about all this stuff. I mean, it comes from him. He's kind of the trendsetter, the guy who set the pattern. And so when people have learned to think like this, and when they think that the big idea here with Christianity is that I'm supposed to have this unconditional assurance, it just forces them to do all of these gymnastics with all of these passages in the scriptures. And here's what I think is really kind of ironic about this, is that on the one hand, it's like, they don't fear God often. They don't fear God because they're taught not to fear God. They're taught that they're not supposed to fear God. There's only supposed to be comfort, assurance, any kind of fear, any kind of uncertainty, oh no, God might throw me into hell kind of thing. That's an indication that you're not really trusting in God's grace. And so they kind of train themselves to get that stuff out. You're not supposed to have fear. And so there's a sense in which there isn't really the fear of God in people in evangelical churches who have indoctrinated themselves and who have been indoctrinated. And so you try to warn them, and you try to help them recover the fear of the Lord. You try to help them to sober up, and often it just kind of bounces off. And what they may say, often they'll point you to Romans 8, where Paul says, God did not give us a spirit of fear, right? Which is, that's why, I'm not going to listen to your warning. I'm not going to let you make me think that I've got some reason to be concerned, because God didn't give me a spirit of fear. And so, I know you're bringing up all these passages that seem to be warnings to Christians and seem to be really serious and kind of scary, but I'm not going to listen, because I don't have a spirit of fear. And what's ironic about it is that they have a spirit of fear. They're terrified to look at this stuff. They're terrified to open up to the possibility that they're wrong about this. They're too afraid to look at the passages that don't mesh with their theology, because those things scare them to death. A lot of them, they're very fragile. They have no spine. They have no backbone. And I know what it's like, because I was like that. I was a very emotionally fragile person because of this kind of Lutheran Calvinistic theology that had been drilled into my head. And it was supposed to take my fear away and make me, take my fear away, because I know I'm going to be saved no matter what. But what it actually does is it makes you more fragile. It weakens you. And now you come to passages like Hebrews 10:26, or all these things Jesus said, and you are terrified at the thought that, whoa, what if that actually means what it says? And it's scary. And so you actually do have a spirit of fear. Ironically, the theology that you thought was supposed to make you unafraid actually makes you very weak and scared, And so anyway, I'm just sharing this because I'm wanting to address these things. I'm wanting to maybe make some videos, or at some point write something or something, to address this, and to try to not only articulate these things very clearly and succinctly, but also write something or create some kind of content to help people who have this thing in their mind, to be able to help them to get out of it, so anyway, sharing that. Right. Yeah, they quote, perfect love casts out all fear. Yeah, and again, they haven't experienced that, because they have this fear. They underneath those words, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of weakness, so yeah, I it's like something that I feel that God has shown to me, and I'm like, how can I get this out there? How can I help people to see this? So I thought I'd articulate it, try to share some of these ideas with you guys, and see if anybody had some helpful feedback or insights, or if you want to share something with me over email or something, to help me think through this and maybe help me create some kind of content, that would be great. So that's really all I had to share. We're already just about half an hour in, and and he said, tell us something Jesus said we should do that many ignore. Well, something Jesus said we should do that many ignore. Well, I mean, there are a number of commandments he said we should do that many ignore. Is that what you're talking about? Just any? Okay, yeah, sure. What he said about marriage, Annie, for example, or divorce, right? Yeah. Something Paul said that we should do is warn each other. And that is something that you don't really see in evangelical churches, because, and Jesus warned his disciples regularly. And Paul said that we're supposed to warn each other. And that's something that you don't see in evangelical churches very much, because obviously a warning, indicates a condition. And on evangelical theology, there are no conditions. So therefore, it doesn't make sense to warn each other. Do not store up wealth. Hello, Neil. Yeah, so now, is there, okay, Super Silver, you said your stance on marriage is very dangerous and I think unbiblical regarding breaking up families to seek out someone you married drunk in your teens. Yeah, okay, well, thanks for your honesty. I understand the perspective there. I think that it's hard for us to wrap our minds around what Jesus said about marriage, and the implications of it for remarried folks. It's hard for us to, in our culture, deal with that, because I think of how we've been conditioned to think about marriage. But if we had learned to think about marriage, and adultery in the same way that we've learned to think about homosexuality, then I think, we would not be so shocked at this idea that an adulterous marriage needs to break up. Two people who are in a same-sex marriage, people in the church anyway, people in the Christian church are not usually shocked at the idea that they would have to bring an end to that relationship, even if there are adopted children involved, because they understand the gravity of the situation and the consequences of not obeying what Paul says about that. But for some reason, Christians tend not to make that connection when it comes to adultery. And okay, so Super Silver. Now this is not the topic we were going to discuss tonight, but I guess it's okay to go there. But maybe we'll go back and forth a little bit here for a couple of minutes, and then I'll probably wrap it up. But you said, God said in Deuteronomy that it is an abomination for a woman who was divorced and married to another to come back to her original partner. Does God change? Okay, yes, I've heard that before. Good thing to bring up there. God does not change, but the standards to which he holds us to have changed. And Jesus is clear about that. And so under the law of Moses, it was okay to divorce and remarry, and it was not okay to go back to the first spouse. Under Jesus, it is not okay to divorce and remarry in the first place. You can't do that. That's not allowed. So under Jesus, someone who returns to their first spouse is just returning to the only person that they've ever really been married to, as far as Jesus is concerned. The person that they got remarried to, that was adultery. That was an adulterous affair. Whereas under the law of Moses, that was allowed. You were allowed to divorce and remarry. It was not adultery under Moses to marry a divorced woman. Deuteronomy is clear about that, right? That was not something that you'd be stoned to death for or something like that. Under Jesus, it's adultery to marry a divorced woman. Full stop, no exceptions. So God has not changed, but his expectations for us have changed. And we have to take that very seriously. So, is there anything else you want to say about that, Super Silver? Okay, a new question came in. This is not really what I wanted to get on here for, but I guess I can do my best here. Okay, somebody asked, Thomas, can we say, oh, by the way, Super Silver, Neil brought up Ezra 10. Neil brought up Ezra 10, something to consider. So if I think maybe the point there is that if unlawful marriages were not allowed to continue under the old covenant, we shouldn't think that they're allowed to continue under the new covenant. Okay. Okay, so somebody asked, can we say we know Jesus if we willfully sin, as in Matthew 7:23? Can we say we know Jesus if we willfully sin? Well, I guess that's a little bit of a, I think that question is maybe not quite as simple as yes or no. I mean, it's clear that Christians are capable of willful sin. They desperately need to repent if they do that, because if someone who has come to know Jesus begins to sin willfully, then they're going to be, if they don't repent, they're going to be disconnected from that saving relationship. But on the other hand, somebody who's willfully disobeying Jesus, it could be that they never knew him. It could be either one of those two things. In either case, somebody desperately needs to repent, or they're not gonna enter the kingdom. Okay, so Super Silver came back and said, divorce is not okay, but he doesn't say you need to break up your family that you had for 25 years before coming to Christ. Well, I think the point that Neil was making when he brought up Ezra 10 was that you had, men in Israel who were married to pagan women, foreign women. They had children with these women. And yet when they discovered that they had married women that they were not allowed to marry under the law, they sent them away. They divorced those women. They brought those marriages to an end. And so I think the implication there, at that time, divorce and remarriage was not forbidden by God. That divorce and remarriage was allowed, but marrying pagan women was not allowed, right? And we see what the solution seems to have been for an unlawful marriage under the old covenant, even if you had kids, was to bring it to an end. Ezra 10, there it is. So under the new covenant, Jesus has made remarriage unlawful. So as difficult as this is, and I don't know if this is your situation, Super Silver, but as difficult as this is, I don't see why we would try to escape from the implications of that. I mean, I think the thing to do is to not try to explain these things away, not try to, not try to look for a way out of it, but just embrace what Jesus says. Whoever divorces and remarries is adultery. Just embrace the implications of that. Whoever marries someone of the same sex is living in sexual immorality. What are the implications? Got to get out of it. Whoever divorces and remarries is committing adultery. What are the implications? Stay in it. Let it keep going because, God's grace. No, you can't approach these things like that. So I would plead with you to reconsider. Hello, Paul. Okay, so I think this might be the last. Well, I don't know what to do here. I mean, this is not why I started this chat, but now it's sort of turned into a Q&A and marriage thing. Okay, Andy says wrap it up. Why don't we wrap it up? Hello, Paul. Good to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so Super Silver came back and said, yes, but is being married adultery, or is marrying an act of adultery? Yeah, Jesus said, whoever sends his wife away or sends his woman away and marries another commits adultery. And I think the reason he labels it adultery is the sexual intercourse. I think that's the primary reason, because he talks about how God brought them together and the two became one flesh. And now, okay, if you send that person away and you become one flesh with somebody else, this is adultery. This is the equivalent of having a fling behind your spouse's back. It is not allowed. So, however you want to slice it, if you have been married to somebody in a legitimate covenant marriage, you cannot have sex with anybody else. You cannot live with anybody else while that person is on this planet. If you do that with somebody else while that person is alive on the planet, it is adultery. And end of story. Okay, Super Silver is challenging me, saying that we need to be. I say we need to be careful, but I think your carefulness in this one something you need to be very careful with. Okay, well, yeah, that's an interesting idea, but it's not a compelling argument. It's not a compelling case for why adultery should be allowed to continue in some cases. And I understand that Jesus did not explicitly command the dissolution of a remarriage, just like Paul doesn't explicitly command that same-sex relationships come to an end. But I think we have to take some of these principles and teachings and work out the implications in the fear of God. And I don't see that that my conclusion is dangerous. Okay, well, I think I'm going to wrap it up there. I invite you to return, Super Silver. And we can continue the conversation, or you can send me an email, but I would urge you to reconsider. And I thank everybody for joining me, and may God help us all to be ready for the coming day, because it is getting closer. Okay, good night, everyone.